All right, welcome everybody to the workshop Tuesday, May 21st, 2024, 5 o'clock, really about 5:03, pardon our lateness here. Call to order, declaration of a quorum, 7 members present. Welcome everybody, thank you all for being here. Brings item C, hearing of citizens. I understand we have 3 cards. However, public comments regarding agenda items will be heard at this time. We reviewed the comment cards. Those are for, based on what the comment card said, were for agenda items related to the board meeting. So we are going to push those to the board meeting because, as it says in C, we have 2 workshop sessions here, and those cards did not appear to be in regards to this. So just letting everybody know, unless y'all wanted to visit on one of the 2 workshop options, those will be pushed to the board meeting at the 7 o'clock hour. So any other cards get turned in at all? Just those? Okay. That'll bring us to item D, D1, presentation and discussion on fiscal year alignment. Ms. Draws, go right ahead.
Let me see if I can find it here. Thank you, Mr. Horak, Dr. Harkrider, members of the board. So I want to visit with you. Is it not on? Okay, I'll turn it. About what we call fiscal year alignment. So school districts have 2 choices, and that's in Education Code 44.011. They can have a fiscal year start that is July 1 and ends June 30 for 12 months, or September 1 through August 31. So you may hear some districts say, oh, we're a June 30 district, or we're an August 31 district. So that's what defines our fiscal year. And you as a board, we have policy that says that College Station ISD is a September 1 through August 31 district. So when I look up, there is 316 districts out of the 1,207. When I did this, I think the last update they did was in April, that are July 1 through June 30. And 62 districts have converted in the past 5 years. Now, I'll be honest, this was a topic that started many, many years ago. And I was all on board at the time, and as actually one of the advocates for offering a July 1 district. And then in a little bit, I'm going to show you some advantages or disadvantages of one year over the other. But then at the end, I didn't end up pulling the trigger and doing it because of some of the things going on back then. But we, as College Station ISD, have a July 1 through June 30. But I'd like to talk to you tonight about the advantages of potentially considering going to a July 1 through June 30 district. So as I said, policy CE legal states exactly that we have those 2 choices. And in policy CE local, the Board of Trustees has said we are September 1 through August 31. So if we should consider changing to July 1, these are some of the advantages. Most of our federal grants start July 1. And that was one of the reasons I, many years ago, was an advocate for that, because then you would have a federal fund that would span 3 years. And so you would have 3 years of a grant open on one year and then the general fund on a different one. So it was a lot to keep up with. But now, in school starting earlier and earlier, when we first started September 1, school didn't start till after Labor Day. So we were then aligning our fiscal year with the school year, or when children come to school and get out. So the fiscal year close process also does not occur at the same time as a new school year. So now we're starting school mid-August. Teachers are coming early August. But we're starting our fiscal year. So one of the things we talked to principals about is they're starting their year and they're wanting to spend the year coming up. They're trying to spend their 24-25 money in August. And I said, well, when are we going to get these items? Well, in August. And I said, well, that's next year's budget. Well, I am in next year. I said, no, we're still in last year. So it is very confusing sometimes for particularly our campuses, because they're thinking of a school year, not a physical year that starts in September. Another advantage is that first year of transition. We're all concerned about fund balance. A lot of that is because of the budget constraints of the district, and in our use of fund balance. But that first year, when a school district converts, we have what we call a short year. So there's 10 months of expenses and really almost 12 months worth of revenue, because we earn our revenue by average daily attendance, so that's going to align with the children. Right now, what you don't realize is I have to take the months in August and backdate those to the right fiscal year. So with the exception of possibly investment earnings, almost everything we have in revenue is earned between that July 1 through June year. So those are some of the things to think about if we want to consider changing to that June 1 year. June 1, it's July 1. But there are also some challenges, and I say they're challenges, I don't think they're disadvantages. Some of these are one-year transitional types of things, so they're just some challenges that we need to work through as a district and as a business office and HR team. So the first year, if we should decide to do this, we've got to prepare both a 10-month and a 12-month budget. Okay, the reason is that you would adopt a 10-month budget, and that's what our departments and campuses would work off of, but we have to send in to TEA and the state 12 months of data. Okay, and that's because if they tried to compare a district that just converted on that 10-month year to a district similar in size, similar in demographics, that's on a 12-month, we're going to look really efficient, right? Because we only have 10 months of expenses. So we're going to have to do both for that one transition year. So we're going to turn into TEA 12 months of data, both for budget and actuals, but you as a board would be adopting a 10-month budget, and that's what we would work off of. Okay, the budget cycle will begin much earlier. So for the business office and HR, which is very involved in the audit process, remember we usually present to you our audited financial statements in December. So we're going to just be finishing that and then turn around and start budget like immediately. So it's going to be a very quick year there. Debt service, we think about that. Our payments for debt service, we pay twice a year, February and August. Okay, so we're going to have fund balance that when we get our June 30 financials, and debt service is going to look very large compared to what we're accustomed to, because it's going to be June 30, but we've got to turn around and make a payment, which is our larger of our two payments. It normally has principal and interest, well before we get property tax revenue. So that August payment we're collecting for the current annual year. So this coming August, we're paying that payment with 2024 tax dollars, not 2023 tax dollars, not 2024. So our debt service fund balance is going to look big, but come September 1, after we make that payment, it's going to go down if we ran a balance sheet. So the transition year mechanics for working with a 10-month and a 12-month budget. So those would have to be worked through. We need to work with our software. How are we going to maintain 2 sets of books? But like I said, it's just something we would have to work through. We're not going to be the first district that ever did it, nor on the software that we have. So it's something that we can come, and this is a 1-year item as well. So we'll also be trying to adopt our budget prior to receiving our property values each year. So we don't get certified values to set our tax rate until the end of July. Okay, so that's just a challenge. It could require 2 public hearings for the board, but not necessarily. So we could have a public hearing in June when you adopt the budget for both a budget and a tax rate. And as long as when we get to the time to adopt a tax rate, which would be August or September, that we are not going above whatever that published rate was, we're okay. If for any reason something changed, that certified value maybe came in lower than we thought it was going to be, and we need more tax dollars, we would have to advertise and publish and hold another public meeting or public hearing. And I think the last challenge is, and this was one of my biggest concerns when I thought about it many years ago, was we'd be adopting a budget on legislative years in June, and legislature normally gets out June 1st. And this last year, It seemed to go on and on and on. So it didn't matter what year end you had, you weren't going to be able to get that done. So those are always challenges. But when I look in at some other districts that have done this, many times if it's not clear, they'll adopt a budget in June and then come back and amend that budget in August as well to account for some other things that might have been not clear at the time or not finalized or interpretations were not there. So those are some of the challenges. It's a lot of work, but it's what we do. So, and many of these, it's just a matter of once we get the practice in place, that we would work through those. So those are some what I would call advantages and challenges. So if we should decide that moving to a July 1 through June 30 year is right for College Station ISD, or you as a board think that it is, this is the timeline. So the current year we're in is still September 1 through August 31. So we'll close the year, we'll move into August. 24-25, the year would start September 1, and this will be our short year, and end June 30. And then for 25-26, the board would be adopting a budget in June of 25 for, again, now a 12-month cycle of July 1 through June 30. So then you can see that timeline at the bottom. So we also would have to, today we're going to update you as the board. In June, we would bring back policy CE for amendment if you so chose to move that year in for us. And there's an application process with TEA that has to be done. They request that to be done at least 1 year prior to the start of your new year. So that would be prior to July 1. So then in July, we would finalize that submission with TEA because we have to follow up with approved minutes of the board. They want to make sure that it was very clear that the Board of Trustees understood and made that change. And then in August of 24, we would adopt that short year budget and set the tax rate. So that's kind of a timeline for transition. I wanted to show you an example of the budget cycle because I mentioned it was going to move up. So the top set is what we're kind of in right now, September 1 begin. And we start working, the business office starts working with our departments and campuses in about February. And really we start some discussions in cabinet really earlier than that, but they really ramp up in about February. And we start talking some with the Board of Trustees. We bring you some regular updates along that line, starting in usually about March, but February is when it starts. We start working on compensation and benefits May, June, and July. Sometimes we try to bring that in June, we're not always able to. Sometimes it's July. And then in August, the budget and tax rate is adopted by the board. If we move to July 1, we kind of back all that up by a couple of months. So we would be starting to look at budgets and setting up things in December because we've moved everything up. We've got to now try to adopt in June. So December through May, we're working on department budgets, campus budgets, refining those, FTEs, teacher numbers, that sort of thing. Comp and benefits kind of moves up just as well. I didn't quite move it up 2 months because we've got to have some data. So April, May, and June would be, April, May, June, right, would be compensation and benefits. And then 2 different adoption dates. The one in June for the budget, and then again in August for the tax rate. So that kind of shows you an example of timeline's the same, it just moves up in the year. So there is some things about, we've already done a VATRE. If there's that, there's some things where a district with a July 1 year can use certified estimates. We get those in May, but we're, at least in the near future, we're not looking at that. So if we consider that, these are the next steps. At the June board meeting, as that timeline said, we would bring back policy CE local for you to consider an amendment to. As well as the TEA application. By June 30, we would have submitted that application for a change of physical year. along with a draft of the minutes, and then follow up with the actual signed minutes from the July board meeting. So I know I went through that quickly. It is a big step if we should decide to do that. So I'll open it for any questions you might have.
I apologize. I missed the first slide. Was this TEA telling us we have to consider it regardless of which way we go, or is this staff?
It's staff. Administration has looked at it and really felt like that for our campuses particularly, they would really like it. You know, they're buying their supplies and not having to save budget from the prior year to start school. You know, looking at the impact, of course, the financial impact on fund balance that it could have as we go through our budget challenges. I'm thinking about payroll. So right now, there's different contract years, but most of them are, of course, teachers. So their first paychecks are in September. So they're trying to close a year and apply raises for 80% of the district, all in the first 10 days of September. So that's huge. This would split that up. They'd be working on year end in July, first part of July, and then that big chunk of raises would not come in until September. So there's several other things to really think about there.
My only worry is not worry is not the right word, but the word of tax rate and having to readjust the tax rate in the current environment.
Yeah, so I had a question on that, and I don't know if we know the answer. The districts that have done this, do we know if they've run into an issue of having to come back and amend in August due to the estimation that was done from the May and having to amend that tax rate in August being on a July 1? Do we know?
I don't know how many have done that. I will tell you that our appraisal district, you know, with the exception of last year, which had some record property value growth and reevaluations, have been pretty consistent between what they call their preliminary values, and they usually give us an estimate then of what they think any appeals processes might go through. They've been pretty consistent. So I don't see a lot of issues. This past year was just an odd year. You're talking about the homestead exemption issues, the freeze, those with frozen levies and carrying back those reductions for 5 years. It was just a lot. I think if anything, districts might have had a harder time this past year. But beyond that, I can't. I don't think it would be a consistent problem. You could have some one-offs where we would have to have that second public hearing. You can change the tax rate. You just can't go over what you published.
Right.
So some districts may be a little conservative and they might post that public hearing for the debt service a penny or so higher than they think they might have to have. And as long as you go lower, you're good.
With the current system that we're in the compressed tax rate, we're already at the floor. So we really don't have much movement or leeway to begin with. So it's not a guessing game for us. And then the INS side, once we get through the initial phase of our bond sales and what we have projected out, roughly it's going to be a 1 cent increase. And then that takes us out. So and that number won't change because we can't tax above what our debt payment would be.
I guess the two practical questions for you, Dr. Harkrider, are you used to this kind of regime? And then has it been discussed with your successor? Is she used to that?
Correct. She's been part of the process. Yes, sir. It's new for her. It's new for me. New for Amy. But you just follow basically the outline that TEA gets you. You visit with other districts of pros and cons of what worked. What are some things if they, had to roll it out again, would they do differently? Right. And that's why we're trying to jump ahead and get ahead of this and have an entire year at our business office.
Coming in fresh.
Correct.
Yeah. So both Ms. Wilson and myself and Mr. Neely have been in conversation with some districts that have converted in the past 5 years and asked them some of the things, what would you have done differently in that transition, and asked them several questions. So we've been in conversation with some other districts as well, and talked to them about what was the hardest part. Once you got done, were you glad that you did it? None of them, You can also go back if you don't like it. There is a process for going back to your September 1. None of them have converted back that we talked to, and I don't know of any that have.
Yeah, it sounds like that so many of the challenges on there were really the transition.
It's the
right,
transition
right.
year.
So obviously, you all are setting yourself up for some additional work during that transition. But if you really believe that the positives outweigh, those challenges in the long run, especially, for the campuses, then because my only two concerns were the one about the tax rate and having to come back and potentially change that. Because just a couple of months ago, we were talking about having to wait so long for those property values to be finalized and even some corrections approved by the state.
Yeah,
and
we're still waiting on that,
Right.
but that really doesn't have anything to do with this part. That was the state values and that horrible year that I said, change in homestead, carry back of the frozen levies. It was just a lot.
Then I'd say the only other thing that you didn't specifically say on the challenges maybe for the campuses, did you discuss, the fact that obviously the longer we are in the school year, the more they know about what next year looks like as far as, their teachers who are going to be in classrooms. I don't know if that's a big factor or not, because honestly, you only really move up the compensation piece really a month from what we do
and
today.
We try to adopt compensation in June now,
Right.
just because some of our contract years for employees start July 1. I don't know that we're going to be able to do that this year. So we do try. So that's not really doing that. As far as, we are working on enrollment projections. We start talking to campuses early March right now. And so looking at where we think the classroom enrollments are going to be, rolling our kids forward and new, and kindergarten is the hard one. Those are the ones that we have not seen for the most part. So
Initially, you said you weren't for this years ago, and now you've shifted. What's making you shift? Is it because more districts are shifting this way?
I think some of the federal funds have changed. They're usually only 12 months. There's still those, and I was kind of looking at, so why am I going to move $100 million budget to chase the year of 10 million in grants? So this size, but grants have changed how they've managed them. And when I say this was probably more than 15 years ago. So that was different. Also, at the time, the district I was working in, if legislative changes, they could have huge impacts on the budget. And so we've learned how to, we can adopt with what we know and come back and amend. So those were the two things that when we really looked at it then, I did not make that move.
Well, that was going to be my question. I know you said you talked to some districts that have done this in the last 5 years. Obviously, as we all know, the legislature hasn't exactly made any drastic changes in the last 5 years as far as public education funding. It seems like once we got in the groove of this, that would be the wild card. It'd be sitting out there every 2 years.
The legislative session to me is that wild card.
Okay. And you still
Because sometimes, you get to that June 1st and what they ended up finally adopting was very different. I've had some years where in March, we really felt confident about how that session was going to go. And the bills went that direction because we're starting to run models, various financial models based on data. And like I said, this last year, it wouldn't matter what our year started because they never finished. Yeah. So that one is the wild card, is trying to, if you tried to get a finalized budget on some years whenever there was a lot of changes in that legislative session, I think you would have to come back and amend the budget.
So even with that possibility of everything getting blown up, so to speak, you think it'd still be worth it to move to?
I do.
Okay.
That's going to be my question, because I'm not going to base my call, vote, whatever, on what the legislative session is going to do. I don't work for them. I'm not here as their mouthpiece, whatever you want to call it. We got to worry about what's here and what we can control. And so that was going to be my question that Josh asked was, is there any reservation in regards to that, the wild card, and you answered and said no. So that being said, I see why we're doing it or considering it. Anything else? Nope. We appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm not going anywhere.
I know. Yep. Brings us to item 2, presentation and discussion of the 24-25 general fund budget. I
Okay.
believe Ms. Draws is going to give us that
I
one.
believe so. Okay, so I think we've done some information previously on some 24-25 budgets, just talked more about current year. So we're going to update you again on current year because that's what I call our baseline. I want to talk about future budgets and what that looks like under current law. Look at some preliminary 24-25 information and then fund balance and a timeline. So first, you saw this previously. This is our current year, our original budget. I put our current amended budget because you can see it really went up from 144 to over 146. Nothing drastic there. That was teacher incentive allotment. So we adopted the budget without it, and we get about $1.7 million. And so we amended it last month or the month before to put those dollars in there. I am recommending this coming year that when we adopt the budget, we include TIA. It's not changing that much now. Once we've gotten an establishment and a role that we go ahead and adopt with teacher incentive allotment. So when I look at where I think we're going to end up, really, expenditures didn't change from when I brought this to you a couple of months ago, but revenue did. So we were able to refine investment earnings, and then there's been some one-time deposits. So I think last time I said the estimated impact on fund balance net of that extraordinary item, we were finishing up one roof early fall. Was last time I said it could be anywhere from like 3.2 to 3.5 million. I'm now saying somewhere in the $2.5 to $2.9 million range because of some additional revenue that we've been able to confirm. So we've improved a little bit in that area to what could possibly be used on fund balance. As a reminder, the biggest challenge this year, of course, enrollment didn't quite get where we wanted it, but we were able to recover from that. We improved attendance as well from last year, but the biggest hit for us is that SHARS. You recall, federal government changed how we could bill, and they backdated that change. And so they hit us with 2 years of dollar amounts, which was about $2.5 million that we were not aware of until about October and November. So that's the biggest reason why we're not able to make the original budget that was there of 1.7. So
Amy,
yes.
on this slide, there's any chance of any additional insurance proceeds still out there?
There could be a little bit. That's one of the last things I want to finalize up. I believe there could be a little bit on that last roof on Forest Ridge. They hold back the professional fees and code enhancements were the only two things that they would have held back. So I'll be working to reconcile that and make sure that we've gotten everything that we should there. So we did on the previous claims. We got 100% of what we were told we would get. They finalized them out, and then we had this last roof. There is one more potentially at Consol that we are working with our insurance company. It will not be a large claim though. So just a few facts to remind you about. So for 23-24, we had that increased homestead exemption from $40,000 to $100,000, and a required tax reduction or tax rate reduction applied to frozen levies all the way back to 2019. So these were the two problem children, as I say, as we were trying to work through things and with our appraisal district. In addition to tax rate compression, all districts were required to put an additional 10-cent reduction unless you were at the floor of the tax rate that you could be at. And we were, but we were like at 9-point-something cents that we implemented. And the state was to provide additional state revenue only. This was the only thing additional state revenue was used for, to make up the losses for those prior bullet points. So they were supposed to make that up. I already mentioned to you the SHARS changes, and that federal revenue cost us about $2.5 million for 23-24. For 24-25, compared to what we had been previously receiving, we think it's going to be about 1.5 million. Because remember, I said we got hit with 2 years worth, so we're thinking it's going to be about $1.5 million less than what we were getting a couple of years ago. We also got some additional safety funds that will continue each year, unless they make some more changes, of $15,000 per campus. There was no change in the basic allotment, hasn't been since 2019. Investment earnings continue to increase and bail us out, so we're very fortunate for that. We can remember just a couple years ago, and that line item in the budget was negligible, and now we're relying on that. And this 23-24, with the exception of 1 month into September, is the last year for ESSER. I want to talk, before we start looking at 24-25, how our current funding system and what we're doing affects our future budgets, because I think it's important to look at this before we start looking at numbers. So we all know that House Bill 3, I believe it was, that did some things that required not only some salary increases, but they mandated that should we get additional funds that year and in future years, they mandated a percentage that goes to salaries. But I want to talk about, I read this term a few weeks ago, fiscal gap. So we always want to say, when do we go into fund balance? When is it appropriate to use fund balance? And we always say one-time expenditures, of course, if you've built it up. You do it for a short term if you've got to dip into fund balance to make sure you're making the right decisions in the future. You don't want to make decisions too quickly and then wish you hadn't and it hurt instruction. But fiscal gap they define as the difference of revenue and expenditures over the long term, which should balance in time, while also indicating the fiscal policy changes necessary to prevent future shortfalls. So I think we fit into that. And if we think about, it's not for the long term, but maybe a couple years, we're all expecting or hoping that there will be some changes in 2025 with the legislative session in the way of funding, okay? But we can't rely on that. So when we start talking about some budget reductions coming up, that's where College Station ISD is being fiscally responsible and not totally relying on the legislature to come in and make up these prior losses and future losses. So that's where I say we have to be careful when we're budgeting, particularly for this upcoming year, and how we use fund balance to ensure that it's a fiscal gap and not something that becomes permanent.
Going back to the slide, just for point of clarification, that requirement for salaries is for like in the campus level, not for administrative staff, not for adjunct.
It's 30% of that must be used on salaries and benefits, and of that 30%, 75% must be used on classroom teachers, counselors, librarians, nurses. Okay, now that could be in addition to something else that they mandated. So not only was it this 30% rule in 2019, they mandated some things before that, and then we had to do it. So most districts spent much more than that 30% when it came out. So this is kind of an example of what I talked about, that physical gap, and we have to be careful with this House Bill 3 and how we have to spend our money. Now, this is for illustration purposes only. It is not College Station ISD numbers, but I think they're numbers that work well for this example. So let's say in 24-25, a district adopts a budget that uses $8 million of fund balance, dipped into fund balance by $8 million, of which $4 million was for compensation and benefit increases. Okay, you're going to see in a little bit, $4 million, it goes pretty quickly when we start looking at some things. So then 25-26 comes along, legislative session, makes some changes, and district gets $6 million of additional revenue. Okay, but now as long as they don't mandate anything differently, 1.8 of that must be spent on compensation and benefits. You're going to see 1.8 million doesn't go very far. So maybe this district again spends $4 million. So now if you look at, you got 6 million, in 2 years' time, you spent 8 million on compensation and benefits. Those are things that go on and on. So you're $2 million in the hole, and we haven't done anything to touch the other inflationary items or mandatory things that went into the budget. So this is where we have to be cautious and think ahead when we're looking at the budget and compensation and benefits for this coming fiscal year. I know it seems strange, but we do have to look for that. Yeah.
And just to clarify that, in this example, that additional revenue, that may never come.
We don't know, right? It may never come. I didn't think about that. We should have put a cloud over that one or something. Yeah, that additional revenue may never come. But if it did, then you have to think about, you're trying to make up for prior years of compensation and increases as well. So now let's get into 24-25. I won't go over all of our goals, but these have remained the same. I think that last bullet is the one that survived, is the one that we're trying to get through. But we still have high quality workforce and support instruction as our main goal throughout this budget process, and to make sure we're using data to make good decisions. So our enrollment forecast, yes, sir.
Sorry, I keep asking
That's
questions.
okay.
But just for the folks watching at home, can you explain the importance of a school district keeping a fund balance? And because, you know, I've heard from lots of members of the public that, oh, you just got these millions of dollars sitting there, you need additional revenue, et cetera, et cetera. So what's the importance
Sure,
of the fund
I can give you an example. So first of all, there is our financial rating system that TEA uses, and their rule of thumb is they want to see in what they call unassigned or unobligated fund balance at least 75 days of operating expenditures. That's what they're going to look at to score you in your financial strength and stability to continue. Okay, so that's something that, financial rating agencies across, they're going to always look at a company's retained earnings. For us, it's called fund balance. So you're building up a savings account. So we think about that for College Station ISD, and we look at what our fund balance is, and the total is 36 million. I don't have the exact number. But we don't start we're spending money in September, October, November, December. We don't get state money until around January, and our property tax monies don't start coming in until November. So a couple of years ago, I tracked this for College Station to see how do we dip into savings without going we don't want to go to the bank and borrow for payroll, right? So looking at September, October, and November, we actually used $15 million of that built up savings to get us to the point where we're collecting our property taxes. If we did not have that fund balance, we would be having to go borrow to make payroll. So it's real important, especially for some districts, based on how they rate you on your state revenues, start getting some state monies in September. College Station does not. So we need to build up a savings account to use, and then we'll put it back in November, December, January, and then for us some more comes in June when we have the split pays come through. So our enrollment forecast, we worked with the demographer. We did have a slight dip in enrollment this current year, 23-24, being very conservative, but we're monitoring registrations right now. But we're looking at a little over 0.5%, 0.6, 0.7% increase in enrollment for next year. So we're sticking with that for our budget forecast, is about a 0.6 or 0.7% increase in enrollment and average daily attendance. I did mention we have continued to improve on our attendance rate, because we get funded on average daily attendance, not enrollment. That's why I have that red line there. So we are tracking a little better again this year. than last year. So ever since COVID, we're not quite to that pre-pandemic rate. I'm not sure districts will ever get back to there, but we're going to sure give it a good shot and try to get there. We were running a little over 96% pre-pandemic. We're now just slightly over about 95%. So we're getting better. Property value growth. We got our preliminary property values. You can see that for 2024, showing about an 8.8% growth. This is after our chief appraiser estimates what she thinks we're going to lose. That 8.8%, I am comparing it to the $100,000 exemption from last year. So we're comparing apples to apples. But where do we think we're going to be certified? With the exception of last year where we did lose some percentage points, I think that was because of the massive increases. Normally they're conservative, so that 8.8 we might gain, it might be 9, a little over 9 point or 9.8, close to 10. So I think looking at this, we can probably say anywhere between 8 and 10%. Might be where College Station would end up with certified and what we'll have a levy and calculate our budget on. For revenue purposes, I'm using 8% at this point, and in a little bit I'll show you really it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. So this is one of the reasons it doesn't make difference. So absent any change in the legislative session, our increase in property values for the maintenance and operations side is going to produce very little additional revenue, at least on a per student basis. If we have a lot of student growth, of course, we're going to see additional total revenue, but not a lot more on a per student basis. Tax rate compression going into this next year. So you would think with 8%, they were normally looking at if you grew more than 2 or 2.5%, you're going to compress that rate. You're going to have to go down. But College Station ISD, we are at the floor. And at this point, they have not said anything about reestablishing that floor. So the floor with 8 cents is 0.6969, and we're at 6999, I think. So we have a potential at this point to go down 0.002 cents, so less than a half a penny potentially. So at one point we thought, oh, we might be able to offset any increase in when we look at the total tax rate. We're going to have very little compression, if any, on the maintenance and operations side.
So in this case, then, if the tax rate stays the same and we have that growth in the values locally, where does that money go?
That's where the cups come into play.
Yeah, okay.
So on a per student basis, as our property values grow, we collect more taxes, but you can see that cup, it signifies what that basic allotment is. So that's how much money we get on a per student basis. So that first that first cup shows kind of a smaller a district with that smaller tax base. Okay, then the next year that tax rate gets a little bigger, so you can see the cup didn't grow. We didn't get a big gulp or anything. We have local taxes and state, but state went down. It's not really state taxes, it's state revenue, but local taxes go up, state revenue goes down. Then the next year, that was our 15, 18% growth year, right? So property taxes almost fill up the cup. And then in that last one, where property taxes exceed, now there are some special allotments for special ed and that sort of thing, but that's where you get into your recapture. So our cup was overflowing, but that overflow is going to go back to the state. We don't get to keep it. So that's where on the general fund side, I'm using 8%, but if it ends up 10, at 7, we're still going to have the same. It's not going to affect our general fund much. Could affect our debt service fund, but not the general fund.
So we budget and resource off of enrollment. If there's 14,000 kids, that's 14,000 desks, that's X number of teachers, maintain our ratios. But then we only get funded. So that where that cup stays the same?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is on a per student, per ADA basis. There was a lot of talk last legislative session of funding us on enrollment, so hopefully they'll discuss that again. But this is on a per average daily attendance. Estimated revenues. Sometimes I used to compare to the prior year budget, but I went ahead and looked at, okay, where I think our 23-24 revenue is going to end, and 24-25 revenue. So you can see I've got that little bit of growth in enrollment and average daily attendance, being a little bit conservative on investment expenses. But look at the two asterisks. This is where it's important. You can see how that cup works. So 8% growth was a little bit of growth in value. You can see our property taxes have a potential to go up 5.3 million, but our state revenue is declining 4.4. So, I mean, that's a perfect example of that cup. We're filling the cup up more with our tax dollars than with state revenue.
And again, as you said, the state revenue continues to go up. We just don't get any
We
of
just
it.
don't get it.
Yeah.
Right. So you can see a little bit of growth, but there's not, I am accounting for the SHARs. We were experiencing indirect cost revenue that in SHARs, and then ESSER was indirect cost revenue. So that going down a little bit. So a little bit of growth, but basically a very flat, what I would call flat revenue stream. I circle that investment earnings because this is all based on a 12-month budget. So of all of these numbers, that is the one that has the potential to change if we go to 10-month. Pretty much, this July 1 through June 30, our kids are there that whole time. So we're going to recognize our state revenue, our TRS on behalf. Most of that other stuff will stay the same, but our investment earnings, maybe a little bit of miscellaneous local would be different. Everything else tends to follow when the children are here. So this is a reminder that of our general fund expenditures, we spend 83, sometimes 84% of our budget on payroll and benefits. This is very similar to most other districts. Our investment is in our people and the benefits, and that's where our money is spent. So when you start thinking about some budget reductions that we might have to make with flat revenue, but we increased in expenditures, if you look at the big piece of pie, we're not going to get very far unless we start hitting that piece. So we talk about payroll and benefits. We wanted to look at healthcare plans. So in 23-24, so those years are wrong. It says 23-23, so sorry about that. We contracted with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas for a fully insured healthcare plan for our employees and their dependent families. In March of this year, we solicited proposals again for another fully insured product. We wanted to make sure that we were getting the best value for the district and our employees. And Blue Cross Blue Shield came back very strong, and they still, once again, are what we would consider the best value for the district. So our recommendation in the meeting tonight would be that we renew with Blue Cross Blue Shield for health care for the next school year. Overall, that proposal does have a 6% increase across just in total premiums and looking at the different plans. So looking at that, a committee in College Station ISD administrators, we met with Gallagher Consulting to start looking at how do we now distribute. So Blue Cross Blue Shield came back with the premiums for the different plans and the tiers, meaning employee only, employee family. But now we have to make the decision or recommendation on how that's split. How much is College Station ISD going to contribute, and how much we are going to ask of our employees? So we worked on that and came up with that second to last column as our recommended distribution. So you can see we've had some multiple contribution rates in the past for College Station. This particular model, we're down to 2. So I think that's a positive right there that the district only has 2 different contribution rates. And then you can see the employee, that's a monthly contribution rate. We do get paid twice a month, so that would be divided in half. You'll see some more information on this in the actual board agenda tonight.
So just while you're here though, so you said overall the rate is a 6% increase. How has the percentage of what CSISD will be contributing
So in this
changed?
particular model, it varies because, what we're looking at is trying to consolidate or reduce the different amounts that College Station's paying. So some of these, the College Station rate might be a little more than 6%, but in other areas it might be less. So we're trying to simplify some things and get some things that way.
But I think I know some of this was in our transmittal, but overall, it's more from CSISD if I read. Or-
Percentage-wise, it was a little less than the six
But-
when you look at the total from the district. So what we would do is look at how many employees are in each plan, and I multiply them out. When you do that, it's a little bit less than the 6% on the CSISD as a whole, and a little bit more than that for the employees as a whole. So.
But it is more money out of the CSISD budget. That's
Yes,
what,
absolutely.
Yes,
So this
that's-
particular model, the cost to CSISD is just under $500,000 a year more than what we have been contributing in the past.
So it's
And
an
our-
increased
About
cost to
$500,000.
us and to.
Yes.
And our monthly contribution with comps in our area is significantly more than other school districts. I can't remember the exact number. I'll have it in June. It was upwards of $150, close to $200 more per month that we contribute versus comparable districts.
So I believe that the state requires that a district contribute $250. I don't
lot of
know
what-
a lot of districts that are at that level, but
A lot of what
guys.
happens when folks start looking for jobs, they look at the salary scale. They never pay attention to the insurance component. And they're thinking bottom line, so they do the math. I can make $4,000 more dollars. I'm going to make more money. And then they get in and they've never looked at the insurance rates. And the insurance rates vary tremendously by districts. So that extra $4,000 that you may have in salary, you may give it up on insurance and you don't realize it until. So we work with our admin team and HR to really target and have potential employees dig into what they're currently paying on their insurance part, because they don't pay attention to it, because they don't look at the itemized deductions. They're just looking at the bottom line.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Blue Cross Blue Shield initially propose quite a bit more than 6% until
Yes,
we
they did.
renegotiated?
yes, they did. We did have an option just to auto renew without going out for RFP, and their first attempt was higher than the 6%. So they came back and sharpened their pencil. So we appreciate that.
Wasn't the first number close to 17%?
I believe it was somewhere between 15 and 17.
So 17 to 6.
So I want to look at some compensation, because remember that pie. So this is going to be the bulk of our conversation, because 83% of our last year budget was compensation and benefits. So if we decide we can't afford to do anything on salaries, we're going to do no increase. We still have what we call a step system for our teachers, librarians, and nurses. So as they gain a year of experience, we could change that and lower it, but we wouldn't. So those teachers that stay with us would get that additional step. So that cost us just shy of $500,000, and then there's benefits, additional TRS, Medicare, that sort that comes along with that. So to say there's no raises, there's still some cost to College Station ISD. So then we wanted to look at what is 2%? What does it cost? But we also know there is some employment groups that we need to do some adjustments, so that's factored in here as well. But if we should consider a 2% and we look at benefits, now this is not healthcare benefits, it's just TRS and the other, right around $3 million is what a 2% would cost us. So what's something in between? So there are several different things that we could consider or talk about. One is we do some percentage, something between a 0 and a 2%, and we can make those calculations. we can look at differentiating that raise percentage between those different employee groups. Teachers and librarians might get the percentage might be based differently than our auxiliaries and our paras or our administrative. So we don't have to do the same percentage across the board to all of our employment groups. And remember that admin, para, and auxiliary, we normally base those on what we call a pay grade midpoint. So it's not usually based on their individual rates. And then the last thing, not to say that College Station ISD would do this, but many districts are looking at retention stipends instead of a raise or in combination. So we could look at a combination of a raise and a retention stipend. If you'll recall, we paid retention stipends out of our ESSER funds. Previously, we did that for 2 years. In order to try to retain our employees during times when it was people were leaving the profession. It's hard to fill those types of things. So many districts are doing either only a retention stipend or a combination thereof. So think back to that House Bill 3 and that sort of thing and how we have to spend our money. That retention stipend then goes away. So that is not an additional amount of pay that stays with the district forever. So that's the reason a lot of districts are doing that. There's nothing that says we have to do it out of ESSER funds or some other. It can be done in the general fund if the board so adopts in their compensation plan. I don't know that that's something we would be recommending, but I wanted to put it out there because there is certainly an option there for us to consider.
The reason why we're putting out multiple options to give you some opportunity to look, in a normal budget cycle, without a deficit, we would be looking at, hey, this is what's best for us long term, considering where we are and no guarantee of any money coming in the 25 legislative session. We got to be pretty calculated in what we think we can do with our current fund balance. I think we also have to assume there's no new money going to come to public education. But we also have to realize that our most important resource is our teachers and staff members. And so based on our current fund balance, based on the unknown, I still feel like it's the best interest of the school district that we have to give a raise moving forward.
So you've seen this slide before, but I want to remind you. Now you talk about those other pieces of that pie, our contracted services and our supplies. Record inflation over the past 4 years since we've had an increase in our basic allotment. So looking at our property and casualty, our fuel, our utilities, health insurance, we now know what our increase is for that, or after tonight's regular board meeting, we should know that one. We don't have the others ironed out now, but we have estimates, and these are areas that we're going to have to fund when we come to our budget. We can try all we can to reduce utilities and conserve, but it comes down to it, we're going to have to fund those, and we could see some rate increases there as well. So looking at 24-25, it's safe to assume that revenue is expected to be very similar to 23-24, absent some spurt in enrollment growth, and we'll be monitoring that closely. That compensation and benefits remain a priority, otherwise we would not be talking to you about that with the budget the way it is. And the recommended budget is anticipated to have expenditures exceeding revenues. We don't know the exact amount yet. We're still working on that. It's a work in progress. So we talked about those mandatory additions. So I've accounted for some of those mandatory increases that we're going to have to look at with estimates. We have the CTE Center. We're very excited that that's opening this next school year, but with that comes utilities, property and casualty insurance, and we've got some required safety issues. So we're looking at those and what they would cost us. You previously in some board meetings have approved a couple of positions that we're including, and we're accounting for the end of ESSER and T-class. A lot of districts only have ESSER to deal with. We were fortunate we did apply for this other temporary funding, and it's also coming to an end, but we were able to do a lot with it. But those items right there, those additions are about $4.2 million. to last year's budget. But as I said, we're not relying on the legislature billing us out, so we're looking at budget reductions. Dr. Harkrider's already talked to you all about the staffing realignment that's been done. We're looking at reductions in staffing based on a strict pupil-to-student ratio formula. So we are monitoring our enrollment on a regular basis and seeing where those are and trying to hold the line on that one. Campus and departments, all of them have been asked for a 5 to 7% reduction in their budgets. It doesn't sound like a lot, but for someone, if they have a small budget, that 5%, I mean, it's not a big number, but it does reduce their amount that they have. So we've asked for that. And we're going to look at maximizing the use of other funding. We have some additional safety grants that have come into play that we can use for general security once we have satisfied all the other requirements. So that's come into play. And then we still have ESSER through the month of September. And they've loosened the rules a little bit. It still ends in September, but they're allowing us to, as long as we've obligated it by September 30, we can take a little longer in getting those goods and services. So I'm running estimates right now to see where we think we're going to end and how we can use those funds to help us out in this transition year till we know what the legislature is going to do. So those reductions, I say 2.8 to 4.5 million, and that's because in the staffing reductions, everything's done through attrition. So everybody that has a job has one next year. So it's all through attrition. So we've secured a number of those positions. Some of them we haven't yet. We're still receiving resignations. Or we may have some positions, but based on our enrollment, we need to wait and see where they're at before I give them up and say we don't need these FTEs. It's not that there's not people in them. We may need to fill them. So given a little bit more time, I think we're going to get closer to that 4.5 million. The 2.8 is basically secured in my opinion. But I think we'll get closer to that 4.5 million with these particular items.
I think it's important to note we're not laying off people.
Correct.
There's
All
been a
through
lot
attrition.
of misinformation out there, and it's through retirements.
Yes.
I just want to make sure people understand that, especially those watching at home.
That's why that's a range there. It's all through attrition.
Mr. Ross, when you say staffing based on strict people to student formulas, what you mean there?
Pupil to student. So let's say on the elementary, we try to staff at the 22 students per classroom, right? So sometimes, if we look at everybody coming back, could be at 24 or 25. We don't know that they're all going to come back yet. So we're really holding that one and saying, nope, we're going to still this number of teachers for your grade level until we know how many is there. And also at our secondary level, really looking at the class counts on the master schedule and that sort of thing. So that's where that budget goal of looking at data to make our decisions comes into play.
Because we have instituted some, programming to help with more efficient staffing at the secondary level already. And then I haven't looked at it in a couple years, but I remember when we were looking at the VATRE, for example, one of the things that I noticed was, and it was a good thing, and still is a good thing, but that CSISD typically had a lower student to teacher ratio than most comparable districts.
Yes, that's true.
And so I assume we're going to, again, try to keep that as much as possible. But
Well, this type of thing is going to close that a little bit. But other districts are also doing that, and they may be going to a higher student to teacher ratio than what they've had before. So who knows, when that data comes out, we may still look a lot better, but it's going to raise that some because we're monitoring it very closely. So what we're continuing to do, so we're not finished, okay? We're going to keep looking for budget reductions and efficiencies all the way to budget adoption time and then beyond because this is never ending. So we're reviewing all resignations to determine if that position should be filled put on hold, which maybe I keep it in the budget as a placeholder, but we're going to hold it and see how we might be able to function differently or without it, or we eliminate that FTE. So we're reviewing all resignations to determine that. Still reviewing. I said every department or budget had to submit some budget reductions. Of course, we have some inflation in those, so might not look like they did, but they may have a lot of line items that did reduce to help compensate for some other inflation. We're monitoring enrollment and campus staffing as we go. We're getting reports on a weekly basis. We're in the process, or almost finished, really, of reviewing software. So we're really looking at some eliminations, looking at how the software was used, utilized, and if it's getting the results that we want. Or we've already had some examples of some other products. Maybe there's something else out there that either does the same or better at a lesser cost to CSISD. So we're doing that. Doing the same thing with our contracted services. So a good example, last month, we put out for RFP, our print management. It came back with an annual estimated cost that's less than what we had previously. A lot of that gets pushed to campuses, so that's going to help them with their 5 to 7% budget reduction requirement. We want to finalize some recommendations on our compensation plan for you, and then continue our budget reduction discussions and efficiencies into 24-25. So just because you adopt the budget doesn't mean that we're going to stop looking at that. Talked about that fund balance. I just want to remind you where we are. So our unassigned at 32.3 million is the one that our financial rating system is looking at for that 75-day mark. But we have 39 million in total. So we have some committed for potential construction that might have to happen. I think of that as the roofs, that something that occurred out of our control, and we would want to make sure that we have some funds out there to get those fixed that would be beyond our insurance. So we're in a good position. We have built some of that back up over time, so that's a good thing.
And I think we talked about this last time, right? That 39 will come down based on the deficit that we end up with this year. That
Yes,
2
ma'am.
point whatever,
Right.
half million that
Yeah, and I'm hoping we'll
So we'll be
improve upon that as well,
Yeah.
so it won't end up 2.9. So a timeline for you. So we're at the budget update I'm sorry, I didn't change my color there. So we're at the budget workshop for May 21st, okay? We will update you again in June. Normally, we like to bring compensation in June. I really feel like with Ms. Wilson coming on, she needs some time to look at it. These are some big decisions. So what I like to do is bring more information on, or Ms. Wilson, on benefits and compensation next time. And I feel like we're looking at July for adopting compensation this time. And then certified property values. TEA will put out the maximum compressed tax rate, which won't be a big surprise for us this year, right? And we'll do our advertisements on or around August 9th. That will put us in line to adopt a budget and have our public hearing at our regular meeting in August. Remember last year we did have to have a special meeting because of how the calendar fell. I think August 1st was on a Tuesday, so it made that third Tuesday the earliest it could possibly be. And when they have to put the ad out and we don't even have our compressed tax rate yet, that was impossible. But I think we can make that deadline this year. So with that, I'll entertain any other questions you might have.
I don't really have a question. I just want to say thank you for all of this information. And I think it's really important for everyone watching, because of all the conversations that we have all the time, to just look at the overview here and realize that although our property values are going up, our district does not have more money to do the things that we really want to do. We are in a tight position right now, and I look at it and I know that these numbers represent people who are working really hard for our students, and we're going to do the best that we can for them with some very limited resources we have. And so I just need to acknowledge that these aren't just numbers; these are the people who are working with our kids. So we do appreciate you giving us all this information. Thank you.
And I just wanted to thank you too. It sounds like, as a new board member, still learning all this, but we're working with a very broken system that we have very little control over. I'm glad to hear that we're thinking about increased compensation, and that's in the forefront, because that obviously leads to better outcomes for our kids. So thank you for all the data as well.
Sure.
Isn't it fun learning about school finance?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what both of you said. Very tough situation that we, as a district, and really public education has been put in. So there will be some more, it sounds like some more painful, somewhat painful changes that we're going to have to deal with, and that we being, the people who are at our schools and our campuses and our classrooms, so we certainly recognize that, or I do. So that 4.5, up to 4.5 million that we're looking at trying to reduce in our expenditures, right? That's where we're trying to get down to at least, I mean, that puts us at the deficit we have today is what
Correct.
basically, I mean, I know you didn't really show big picture numbers, but that's still, if we could do that whole 4.5 based on what you showed, we'd still have a deficit
Yes,
budget.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And then that's not compensation counted in yet, so.
Without compensation
Right.
counted in there. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it is not and I kind of wish you would have summarized that I'm ready to see some more, the numbers.
You are, but we're still working on it, and so to put out something, I want to get closer, and I think we can do that by the next board meeting, is to get some better numbers, which would be 2 months ahead of the time you have to adopt a budget, so.
Correct. We're not trying to put out a scenario where the sky's falling and then come back in June and go, ta-da, we fixed all the numbers. We know where we are, but we also know we can reduce that number. So when we publicly put out a number, we want it to be a number that we feel comfortable with, because right now we're still digging in. Everything that we're looking at as far as numbers and staff attrition, we visit with principals, we look at numbers, we look at data. We've become much more efficient at the secondary level with our master schedules. We had some extra off periods and things that some staff members have that we've been able to reduce that. And so they've got kids back in the classroom. And it's the same thing. Everything that we're going to do, we know the situation that we're in will never compromise student learning. And we'll never compromise the staff. And then that's where we've got to do a good job when we hit the 25 session, is we've got to get out and we've got to advocate with our legislators and inform our community of what's taking place in Austin, rally their support. If you truly believe in public ed and our teachers and our kids, then we're going to need their help publicly in contacting our elected officials of what we expect here in College Station.
And I certainly recognize too that there are areas, we grew so fast that we can step back and find ways to be more efficient with what we're doing. So I think there are going to be some positives that come out of that too. And I was just trying to look at, again, I'm the numbers person. I'm estimating you can tell me if I'm off, 2 to 3% of our, or even 3.5% of our compensation budget that might be being reduced. And I'm trying to find that 4.5 out of, a percentage. It's 83% of our overall money. So, I mean, that's to me looking at the kind of impact that we will see on our campuses, right? About a 2% reduction, 2 to 3% reduction in staffing positions. Am I way off on that?
Well,
I mean, that's
not
to me, I
all.
want to know how much we're.
Not all campuses. I mean, we have some elementary campuses that, based on their current enrollment, this last year we estimated enrollment and we didn't quite get there. So some of them have a couple of extra teachers because we've already staffed up. We did move some teachers last year as well. We don't like to do that. But when looking at this campus needed teachers because they had more enrollment than we thought, we did move them, and Ms. Hickman did a great job of smoothing that over and making that happen. So some campuses might be gaining a couple of positions, some might be flat, and others might be losing, depending on where we get that estimated enrollment by campus. And so some are losing some staff members, totals, and others are not. So we're playing that balance.
Yeah, and of course, it's not across the board, and we're doing it very carefully. So I'm not saying that's a bad number, but it's, I mean, there,
I think
Yeah,
that number's
it's all-
closer to 1 to 1.5% when it's
Yeah.
all
maybe
said
we
and done.
can, without, you know, maybe
We can,
Yeah.
have
we
an
can
idea.
provide you with a
Yeah,
number.
for
Yes.
staffing, I
will
think
be.
Dr. Harkrider's right. I think it's be about that. If you're looking at percentages of staff, yes. I think it's
Again, we're looking at, yeah, having to cut our budget by a significant, lot less significant percent. We need to, so.
Going back a dozen slides or so, deficit sounds bad, but it's a little d, not a big D. We have a $146 million budget, and we're going to have a $3 million shortfall. By my math, about 75% of that shortfall is extraordinary, roofs, inflationary, which isn't going to be every
It's
year.
about half a million.
So there's
dollars
shocks
this
to
year.
the system, and I go back. I like that first slide you had about the fiscal gap. It's temporary, and that's why we have the not endowment, the general fund. And I'm actually I'm less worried because we've got that, and it really doesn't. It's a drop in the bucket. Now I like what you were saying. We're not going to do this every year, but it seems to be saying the term.
Biggest impact to this year's deficit is the SHARs being taken away, $2.5 million. We knew absolutely nothing about it until we started hearing rumors about it in the fall. And then not only did they go back 1 year, they went back 2 years and then acted like they were doing us a favor that they only went back 2 years. Because I believe they said we had been collecting funds. And this is not we as in us, this is everybody in the state since I think 2012.
2012.
2012, we had been getting reimbursed for expenses that we shouldn't have been. Not our mistake, obviously their mistake.
By my math, it's 1.65% deficit.
But you're right. So this current year, that $500,000 in extraordinary loss is a one-time. We hope we don't have to experience that hailstorm again.
And for the folks watching at home, what is SHARS?
SHARs, I wish I knew what the acronym, but it is federal reimbursements for services that the school district provides to students. If they were out in the public industry and received these services, there would be a bill to Medicaid, if they're Medicaid eligible.
So this is, federal dollars, not state.
Yeah, federal.
You know, I'm trying to look for money everywhere in this thing. Will the CTE Center be considered a campus?
No, sir. So
crap.
they will have, those students will be coded back to their home campus because they're not there all day. I don't think it would qualify.
Can
as a
we
campus
show
member.
TEA that it might be a campus? So we can at least get $15,000 for security.
You know, I would have to read what their
Well-
definition, but to my knowledge, no, it does not get its a
I'm just
distinct
curious.
campus number, and that's what you would have to be a campus. It must have a principal. There's some certain requirements, and
Yeah,
we don't
just
have any
like I
of
said.
those.
Those animals are worth a lot of money, so.
Tell you what, so.
Opportunity to generate revenue through it by hosting things or
I have not seen that a fee schedule for that. That's something we can certainly talk about. We want to make sure that we're going to accommodate our own students first and what those needs are before we would start hosting to anything else. And you have to realize, then you bring host in, then our children have their investments and their livestock out there. So we haven't explored that. I think we need to operate it a little bit before we go there.
I did notice you had a few extra dollars for local revenue on one of the slides.
On one of the slides, current year or next year?
I think it was, I don't remember. So it was like $100,000.
Yeah, there is some other revenues that we've been able to secure for next year as well. So I'm recognizing that. I'm looking for revenue wherever I can. So
I just want to add, while I'm obviously frustrated with the state and how much money that's they've been holding back from us for many years now, I do have great faith in our staff and our teachers, and I do know that we will, continue to meet the needs of our students through this. And I also hope that we can compensate our teachers as much as we are able to. The other thing I know we have is a great community too that steps up to support us. And so, I mean, this may be where we lean more, you know, when the campuses are having to have a 5% just cut to some of their budget you mentioned, right? That's where, you know, those PTOs and our education foundation can, you know, we're lucky to have them, and they can hopefully help fill some of that gap as well.
Anything else? Amy, we appreciate it. You had a lot tonight. Appreciate you. That'll bring us to item E, adjourn.